October last year, we published Project Svalbard, which was an internal project name for the plan to take H100 from 1,000 Bitcoin to 10,000 Bitcoin and beyond. I think it's important to see Project Svalbard in light of the market environment we was in at that time, because October last year, it was still a lot of enthusiasm and optimism in the market, which is quite different from what we see now, both in terms of price development in Bitcoin itself and also, of course, price development in the stock, in the Bitcoin treasury companies. And now, when January 2026 is over, it marks the end of Project Svalbard. And I think it's important that we have this discussion and are honest and share some reflections on the plan, on what we achieved, on what we not achieved, and how we look at the future and want to do next.
Yeah, Project Svalbard was a project where we focused on three different things. One was how to increase liquidity, funding, and credibility. It was focused on fundraising and investor relations. And third point was growth in the ecosystem. That plan was how do H100 goes from 1,000 to 10,000 and beyond. And to be very clear, that's still very much the focus. But when the market turns, we also quickly understood that we needed to play defense and to protect our capital, because the worst case scenario here was that we run out of money and have to sell or do anything with our Bitcoin, which we are quite happy that will not happen, and we have more than enough liquidity for this year and for a long time out in 2027. So to start with the plan, we had a few points which was all about building infrastructure for a global Bitcoin treasury operation. We started by building a lot of institutional partnerships. Because of the tough market environment, we was able to really have good discussions with every Bitcoin treasury company that we think has importance, and we have built great network and community with all the other players, which means we now have one of the best insights together with the rest of the leaders in the industry on how to build this industry to the next step. We also discussed with multiple investment banks. We have used this tough market environment to speak with bigger, more traditional investors that now start slowly. We, to be honest, maybe thought they was going to act quicker, but we now have interesting discussions with bigger capital allocators from a more traditional fiat perspective. We also transitioned from K3 to IFRS, and our next report will be based on international accounting standards, which means that we now have the infrastructure to uplist or go to other exchanges with the infrastructure we now have when we see the opportunity being there. The other point was quite a few capital markets activities. We mentioned tokenized Bitcoin-denominated convertible bonds. We had other Bitcoin-denominated global products, structured equity tranches, ATM-like programs, and new Nordic offerings. All of the documents for that is more or less ready, and if the market is ready, we will be very, very quick in a very similar fashion that we did from 0 to 1,000. We now have all the instruments ready when we see the investor demand.
I think it's important to say that this plan was not just about getting the products live in the market. Of course, that was the goal, but it was more about having the right toolbox for the different market scenarios. And we now have the toolbox that we could use when the market is there. So I think it shouldn't be a goal in itself to do a specific instrument, because the instrument has to be right for the market you are in. And what we have learned by studying other industries like oil and gas, which we have used a lot of time on, is that when the market is tough, it's more about, as you say, playing defense, not doing anything stupid, and actually focus on survive and come out of the tough times as a stronger company.
Mm-hmm. And what we also have learned in these market conditions is that when we raised capital, we had very favorable terms for the company and the shareholders. And we are not even at a small risk of selling any Bitcoin or returning any Bitcoin back. And the debt we have today is on very favorable terms for a long period of time. And I think that's something we value, and we see that we are in this for a long period of time. We want to build this for the next 10 plus years, and therefore the infrastructure and what you do to create a good fundament is critical to do that. And when the capital is not there and the macro environment hits you in the face, you have to play, or at least our conclusion is you have to play defense, so you can actually ensure that you are in the position to take good decisions for your shareholders, both short term and long term.
Yep. And then the next point on the plan was something we called Operation Thunderbolt, which was M&A. And we used a lot of time during the fall in 2025 to look into both public-to-public M&As. We spoke with very many players in the market on a general level to understand how they look at M&A. And we also had some specific discussions. And the latest news is that we enter into the LOI with Future, which we still are negotiating on the final transaction agreement, but we are very optimistic and it's quite realistic that we will get that deal through. We have learned a lot of how M&A works and how we want to use M&A going forward. But I think the Future deal will be very great for H100.
100%. So the M&A was operational Merkle, right?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So we quickly understood that M&A would be a big part, or consolidation will be a big part of this industry. And you have your experience with M&A as a lawyer, and we thought that it was going to be easier to do public to public, as you said, but public to private M&A is quite attractive. And all the work we did in Q4, which we spent more or less every day in one or another type of discussion for an M&A transaction, we learned that scale is important, especially for credit instruments, but equity is quite hard to merge. You have teams, you have jurisdictions, you have different legal frameworks, but you still have a huge opportunity to combine balance sheets, which we discussed last week. So all this work has given us enough knowledge to basically ensure that we can do the right thing to accomplish scale and go forward.
Yeah, and then maybe take a step back on Operation Thunderbolt.
Yes.
It's a mess with all these operation names, but what was that about?
So that was all about building a relationship with investment banks. We had a great roadshow to the US, and we connected with all, I would say, investment banks of importance that we believe is critical to have in our network going forward. And the result of the work we have done on the investment bank side is that we now have regular meetings with the major investment banks in the major capital markets, which are still the US. But we also have discussed with a lot of the locals one in the Nordics, Norway and Sweden, and also a few of the Europeans.
Yeah.
So we think this is a great groundwork for when the market turns. We are in a very good position to act fast. And I will say that's maybe the big conclusion of Operational Svalbard is that we are now ready. We don't need to do a lot of paperwork before we're able to act if the market is ready for it.
Yeah, totally agree. And I think on the contacts with the investment banks, it goes both ways. So the interest banks are contacting us on a regular basis to hear how we look at the market and what we want to do. And on their side, they are talking to their customers and investors to try to find what deals are attractive. So you have multiple, let's call it deal makers or salespersons that of course want to place capital into these companies. And then the next point was to expand the lineup on conferences, panels globally. And I think you, Sander, you have established yourself as one of the leaders within this industry that regularly are talking on the biggest conferences, which is great, and are planning to do that going forward.
I would say from early last year till today, we have more or less presence in all the major conferences, and we speak with the big players, and we already have keynotes in Sweden, Stockholm, for Stockholm FinTech Week. So this is an important thing for us to ensure that we are there talking to the audience, but also connecting with the industry in general. And I would say like the progress we have made there over the last 9 months is quite interesting, and I think that will give us a lot of benefits going forward, especially locally in the Nordics.
The next point is a more technical point on independent analyst research coverage, which I think is a point to see that the Nordics are some years behind, especially US, when it comes to Bitcoin adoption. And but we are having a lot of interesting discussions with the banks, and there will be interest from the banks of covering these companies. But from my point of view, it also has to come organically. They have to want to do it themselves and actually have the right competence to do it. So that will come.
Yeah, that's a point where we haven't been able to penetrate the TradFi locally yet, but we have made a lot of progress and made a lot of connections. So it will happen at one point, but it's fair to say that the Nordics are lagging quite behind when it comes to these kind of things.
Yeah. And then we had a point on doing a global end-of-year roadshow last year. And when we came into December, we reflected on what to do. Should we travel around, talk to new investors, or should we try to sit down with the investors we already have and ask them, how do you look at the market going forward? What do you want to do with the company, and so on? And I think that was a good priority. That's what we did, and we learned a lot from these discussions.
Yeah, I think the major takeaway is you have to have focus. You can't do too many things at once. I think that's a big learning for us. And when things goes and change very quickly, you think you can do more than 2 or 3 things. And that was also the conclusion with the investors at the end of last year, that we should be more narrow. We should have a more clear, defined strategy, which we are now working on with a fewer elements that we will compound over time rather than doing short-term plans. So we are quite married to our main KPI, which is increasing Bitcoin per share over time. And we believe that will be done by providing the best Bitcoin services. It's a play between fiat and Bitcoin, but I think it's very important that Bitcoin treasury companies are for Bitcoiners, and they are for investors that wants Bitcoin exposure or big balance sheets with a lot of Bitcoin that wants to put that to use. So having that focus on the Bitcoiner will be a core focus of 2026 and something we are doing on a day-by-day basis today.
Yeah. And then we have some point which we probably don't need to use so much time on, but one point was to expand relationships with Bitcoin Treasury podcasts. You are on more and more podcasts, so that development is good. And then also to have a good relationship with more traditional financial press, which I think we are seeing a great development when the big Norwegian financial newspapers today are writing about the Bitcoin development in general. They're often calling you to have a comment. So I think that's a very good sign that you're starting to be the face of Bitcoin in the Nordics, and we hope to, of course, get some interest outside of the Nordics as well.
Yeah, but it's very important to build locally, and where we have maybe made the most progress in Q4 and Q1 is local Nordic podcast and local PR. I think that is very important to build a shareholder base also home. We saw that 70% or close to 80% of our shareholder is outside Sweden. And therefore we believe that spending a little bit more time to educate and get people to understand what we're doing locally is quite important and something we will keep focusing on.
Yeah. And then we had a point on developing more educational content. I guess that's what we are doing here now with these, let's call it a podcast format, which we, maybe not educational, but we share our reflections and perspective on the industry and what we are doing. So
yeah, and it's also a good way for us to share what's on our mind. It gives us an opportunity to speak to the global community and get feedback. And I think the podcast episode or the episode we had last week about this collaborative effort of how to merge balance sheets was quite popular. So we see that some episodes goes very well, and others less so. But again, it gives us like the finger on the pulse to say, okay, this is what the community care about, and this is maybe not so important.
Yeah, and I think we have to be honest that this is an industry we actually all together have to build.
Yeah.
So collaboration and working together and not sitting on your own ideas instead of talking to each other and sharing the ideas. I think that's the way we need to build this industry.
Bitcoin is an open source project. It's built on collaboration, and it's very important that we keep having that ethos also when we centralize it into corporate entities. I would say that's very much alive in our industry. You can access most CEOs and chairmen very easily, and I think most people agree that we work for Bitcoin, because if Bitcoin fails, everyone fails. So we have a share incentive to make this industry as good as possible. And that's also why we see Bitcoin as a commodity, where Bitcoin needs to have multiple use case to be successful in the long run.
Yeah, and then we had in there that we wanted to have new trading and exchange partners, which I think we have built out our network and partnerships, both when it comes to custody, both when it comes to potential other trading platforms. If one day you want to use some strategies on the Bitcoin stack, maybe not some concrete news to or specific news to share there, but we have had some development. And then a point which I think you, Sander, is the best to talk about, which was to launch a tokenized stock, and you have been working with tokenization for 5 years at least, as I'm aware of. So we haven't launched our tokenized stock ourselves, but how do you look at tokenization?
Yeah, I think it's many reasons why. It's one part demand, one part infrastructure is the reason why it's not live. But I think when you saw the recent development at World Economic Forum, the major topic for all the banks was tokenization. And I think tokenization should happen on top of Bitcoin. We now see that a lot of the banks are using either private blockchains or other blockchains than Bitcoin to do this. So you want to tokenize not only for access, which I think is a huge benefit for tokenization, but more importantly, you want to do that to build out the Bitcoin capital markets and ensure that Bitcoin wins that infrastructure as well. Obviously, Adam Back is a big shareholder. It was an initiative that we discussed a lot with him. It's not live yet, but it's definitely a way we want to push when the market is ready.
Yeah, and I think we, and as you say, the general feeling we have on the market is that tokenization is here to stay, and we will see a great development there over the next years.
Yeah, I think we all agree that illiquid investments has had its peak. I think we will see way more public listed companies, but maybe also tokenization will bridge that private to public gap. And I just think that the new young generation, they prefer to have things liquid, tradable, 24/7, and that's where I think we will see a lot of capital rotating into liquid alternatives rather than illiquid strategies.
Yeah. And then point 21 in the Project Svalbard plan to organize a health and Bitcoin think tank on Svalbard, which we haven't done.
Yep.
And I think it's important to say here that in a tough market, as we see now, as we have mentioned multiple times, it's important to play defense. And we actually looked into what, for example, oil and gas or other cyclical companies are doing when times are tough. And what they are doing is actually they're cutting costs, often by letting people go. We don't need to do that because we have a lean organization. And they are focusing on protecting their liquidity instead of using more, what should I say, using money on the nice to have and not the need to have items. And I think this is something which we really plan to do, and it would be great to do that, but the timing isn't right now in January 2026.
Again, also with conversations with investors, it's a pretty costly trip to Svalbard. We wanted to do one of the most extreme think tanks that have ever happened. When we saw companies and also investors being more playing defense, it was not the right time. So we decided to cancel that. But for me, Project Svalbard represent a time where we, on a weekly basis, worked on the infrastructure. The market hits us quite in the face, but since October till today, we have been consistently working on how to prepare for the right fundraising structures, how to have the right accounting system for uplisting or new OTCs or everything that we know is important for the long run. And liquidity is, of course, one of the major issues in our stock, but it's also a major opportunity for other people. I think from capital raising tools, from investment bank relationships, Q4 was hugely impacted by M&A discussions. We learned a ton from how to do it. You can do it public to public, you can do it public to private. It's quicker and easier to do public to private. But we also came out with this consolidation idea on the balance sheet level. So we have been quite consistent in not spending money. Was very important for us. We understood that this could last longer than we wanted. And again, I think when we wrap up Project Svalbard, and what investors need to understand is we are now prepared for a long period of time with tougher market conditions. So your money is safe with us. We have enough liquidity to survive for a long period of time without touching any of our Bitcoin. We don't need to lend against our Bitcoin. That cash is in the bank, and that's what we protect. When the market turns, because Bitcoin, and we are strong believers that Bitcoin is going to go up to the right at one point, it can take longer than you expect. But then we have the investment bank partners, we know who to collaborate with, we have the fundraising tools, and we are basically ready to run faster than ever. So I think that's the conclusion with Project Svalbard. Everyone would, of course, like to see more fundraising activities or more Bitcoin on the balance sheet, but no one wants more Bitcoin on the balance sheet at the negative MNAV. Because that's basically not accretive anymore. It's dilutes you away from your future Bitcoin performance. And in a Nordic perspective, 1000 Bitcoin is the leading Bitcoin treasury company with quite significant leadership. Even if we want to play like European or global, we also have to protect what we have, and we believe we are sitting on a fantastic asset. We believe that that's going to grow over time, and we are now prepared for doing the right things in both tough times and also when times are easier again.
Yeah, so I think we will end there. This episode marks the end of Project Svalbard, and we are excited to share more specifically what the plan is for the next year when that time comes. So thank you for listening and watching.